Once again, we welcome you back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome a familiar voice back to the program. That would be Ethan Brown. He is a contributor for Young Voices. And Ethan, you also wear a couple of other hats. Tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I am the founder and host of The Sweaty Penguin, which is a comedy climate program presented by PBS's Climate Initiative, Peril and Promise. We're working to make climate change less overwhelming, less politicized, and more fun.
Well, and you have a wonderful article that goes hand in hand with this topic. And now that you mention it, the article's titled "The Doomsday Clock is a Terrible Metaphor for Climate Change." But man, I'll tell you, when you bring up the Doomsday Clock, I can recall that going back to, probably, I don't know, early junior high. It's 2 minutes to midnight. The world is doomed at midnight. And I guess I wasn't aware that now that is being applied to climate change. Tell me about who some of the people are applying that metaphor to climate change.
Well, the Doomsday Clock was developed in 1947 by atomic scientists, and at that point it was just a metaphor to raise awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons. And I'm not a nuclear weapons expert by any means. All I know is that these scientists are unveiling this clock and not going into underground bunkers right now. But in terms of climate, it became integrated around 2007, and there's a few other topics that have been integrated, some things related to biotech. But I felt that the climate link just doesn't make a lot of sense, and we can get into it. I think climate change and nuclear weapons are just too different to go under the same umbrella.
Okay. No, I think fair enough. And of course, the tensions with nuclear weapons come and go. Climate change, on the other hand, I'd love to get your take on this. Is something that's always ongoing in some form, correct?
Yeah, climate change is a more gradual process than if a nuclear war just happened. And it's not something that is like a Don't Look Up-esque comet hitting the Earth and everyone dies all at once, right? We see changes to temperature and precipitation and extreme weather across a variety of regions around the world, affecting everyone in different ways. And I think to say 90 seconds to midnight. Again, this year's announcement was more about the escalating conflict in Russia and Ukraine, but a lot of headlines have mentioned the climate link. Their press release mentioned some concerns about climate change. And to say 90 seconds to midnight related to climate, yes, we're not in great shape on climate, but we also... First off, climate change is already here, so to say 90 seconds to midnight implies that it's not, which is weird, but then also it implies that there's some doomsday event that will happen, which also is not true.
But boy, when we're scared, it seems like it's a lot easier to steer us in one direction or another. And it kind of makes me wonder if there aren't people who understand that and want to use that, to their advantage in terms of whatever their agenda might be.
It's tricky. There are studies that show that emotions of fear and guilt will lead people to disengage with a cause rather than engage with it. And a large part of why I feel so passionately about the work I do, 69% of Gen Z says that they feel anxious after viewing social media content about climate change. And maybe there's a little bit of reason to it, but it shouldn't be to that degree, maybe. And I think that if people are disengaging because they're just too overwhelmed, then we don't really get anywhere. Whereas if we can understand the risks and the scarier parts, but also understand where there are real exciting climate solutions that can help not just the environment, but also the economy, health, justice, security, everything we care about. That's why I get excited to work on climate. And I feel like I'm optimistic enough to... I'm anxious about other things, but that I think I hold it together pretty well on.
It's one of the things I do admire about you, Ethan, is you take what can be a very polarizing and frightening topic to some. I mean, to some it seems like this is an existential crisis, and yet you keep it to where a rational discussion can be had, and concerns addressed without it coming down to that polarized either or. You're either 100% for this or you're 100% for that. I suspect there are people all over the spectrum in terms of what they see and how they would attribute, climate change and the influences that, for instance, man might have on accelerating climate change.
Yeah, I was thinking about recently, and I can't believe I'm going to say this publicly, but I obviously kind of the two extreme ends of the spectrum are climate doom and climate denial, and the truth lies somewhere in between there, and we know exactly where if we just read the science. But I was thinking about for myself as a climate reporter how both are serious problems to me as a professional, but personally the doom I think gets to me in a weirder way, because if someone denies climate change, they might look at me and say, oh, he's working on a problem that doesn't exist, and that's kind of funny to me. But if someone denies, or if someone is expressing doom, then they're suggesting there is a problem and I'm just incapable of doing anything about it, and none of us are. And that's, to me, a kind of grim outlook, and kind of makes you frustrated when it can be someone close to you in your life that feels that way. So I really hope that my work and the work of others in this space can shift us away from this doom talk and toward what the actual science is telling us. I think it makes it a lot easier to do our work, and we can make a lot of progress.
Ethan, sometimes when I hear talk of climate change or action or policy, to address climate change, my first thought is, oh, crap. Where's my wallet? And how much more control are they going to call for over another aspect of my life? Now, again, that's one extreme, but I know there are things that are being done to help mitigate man's impact on the environment. Talk to me about some of the more positive things that you're seeing that don't involve basically increasing government power over me or taking more money out of my wallet.
What's exciting now is solar, wind, some of these cleaner energy technologies are reaching a point where they are cost competitive with other energy sources. I believe 62% of clean energy at this point solar and wind at this point has outcompeted fossil fuels to the point where it's cheaper to build that new solar wind infrastructure than to continue using fossil fuels. In the United States, there is only one coal plant out of hundreds where it is more economically efficient to continue using that coal plant as opposed to building new solar and wind farms. So that's an exciting place to be, and that means when we talk about governments, obviously there are a lot of options to increase regulation, but you can also look to deregulation and saying, how can we make this a freer market? Because in that freer market, solar and wind are going to do a heck of a job. We've seen the cost of solar go down 85% in the last decade, offshore wind by 55%, batteries by 85%. So there's so many solutions we could talk about, but that's just one example where you can see how deregulation in some aspects could actually help things out.
I think that there would be powerful incentive for the free market to pursue cleaner energy, and I'm including in that nuclear energy as part of that. But first we got to get a lot of that regulatory straitjacket off of them to allow that kind of innovation to take place. So is there a likelihood that governments are going to turn loose of some of that power, or are they pretty determined to hang on to it?
I don't know. We'll see. I think, again, there's many paths for how we can address climate change. There's not just one solution. What I feel is important is for everyone to bring their voice to the table and take it seriously. I think, again, talking about doom or denial, that doesn't help. So if we can come and say, hey, this is a serious problem, here's my idea for how to fix it, and the conversation can be about which solution will work best, then maybe that is deregulation, maybe that's more regulation, maybe that's nothing to do with government and it's just incentivizing the right kind of innovation. But we need to have that conversation and not be stuck on whether or not the world is going to end on Thursday, because that doesn't get us anywhere.
Good point. Again, we are talking with Ethan Brown. He is a contributor for Young Voices and also the host of the Sweaty Penguin. Where can people find you? Where can they follow you on social media?
You can find the Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts, as well as thesweatypenguin.com or pbs.org/PerilAndPromise. You can find me at EthanBrown5151 on Twitter, and you can find the Sweaty Penguin on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Neetu Arnold to the program. Neetu is a fellow at the National Association of Scholars and a Young Voices contributor. And Neetu, I'm sure we probably left a few things off of the list of things you do or things that you're about. Tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I mean, you got it right that I am a research fellow at the National Association of Scholars, and I work on a lot of higher education issues. I've typically come on your show to talk about college finances, especially the student debt issue. But this time I'm here to talk about a diversity, equity, and inclusion course and the process in getting that information from Arizona State University as part of a larger project I'm working on for the NIS on journalism education.
Well, I'm seeing a lot lately about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's a very polarizing issue, to put it mildly. Tell me about what's going on at Arizona State University. How does this fit into their journalism program?
Yes. So just to introduce people to DEI, if they don't know what that is already, it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's essentially a euphemistic sounding set of ideals, which has really turned into loyalty oaths to a progressive value system. And I would say it's anything but inclusive. If you're somebody who opposes these ideals, or you say that you support giving people equality, you want people to have a fair opportunity, but you don't necessarily believe in forcing equal outcomes, then you might see yourself not having too many opportunities, especially in academia. And so that's why it's become a very big issue. And how this relates to Arizona State University is that the Cronkite School of Journalism began forcing students to take a DEI journalism course, and this was beginning in fall 2022. What makes this story even more interesting is the process in which I wanted to find out more about this course and what they were teaching, and there was a lot of stalling and obfuscation from ASU.
So, yeah, I'm looking at why more and more of these universities and colleges are requiring diversity statements, even from engineering students and medical students. And It seems like, okay, so there's an agenda that seems to be afoot here. You looked into the syllabus. What was it like getting the information about this course? It sounds like it was not just as simple as, may I see what you're actually teaching here?
Right. And I would say, long story short, Arizona State University said that they couldn't give me course materials for this DEI course because it was apparently a trade secret. So I had no idea that course materials, course syllabus is apparently top secret that nobody should know anything about. So here's the more in-depth story. So a couple of months ago, I filed a public information request to the university to obtain these documents. And for those who don't know, public information requests, they go by many names. It allows Americans to examine government documents, anywhere from meeting minutes at a town council meeting to instructional materials for K through 12 students. And it's a really powerful tool to hold government institutions accountable. So back to the story, I filed this public information request, and Arizona State tells me that they can't give this information to me electronically because it was a trade secret and that it was copyright protected materials. So, yes, and that's actually a common reason you might see universities not giving course materials, but this is not a common practice everywhere. I filed public information requests several times in many different states, and UNC Chapel Hill, the University of Wisconsin, they've given me course materials when I've asked for it. So it is possible to give this information. So normally my journey would have ended here because they said they couldn't send it to me by email. But I did anticipate being in the state for Christmas. So I asked if I could view the course materials in person. And they initially said, yes, I could. And we scheduled a time to meet in late December. And then that's when the excuses started to come in. So first, they tried to get me to reschedule to a different day because there would be, quote, a fire drill that could cause a lot of confusion. And I really did not want to move it to another day because I was already there for a limited amount of time. This was primarily for vacation, so I also didn't, I just didn't have that much time. And I didn't want it to be the case that we try to reschedule and then it turns out we're just having problems. And it's like, well, the university could say, well, we tried to accommodate you, but it looks like we're just not. We're not able to find a day that works for both of us. So I made sure that I could go. I just had it rescheduled from the morning to the afternoon. We're going to come back to that fire drill in a little bit. So they tell me first there's a fire drill. Then when I go on campus to view these materials, I was only given 1 hour to inspect the materials, to take notes on it. This was not a stipulation that was discussed before, and I've actually encountered a similar situation at the University of Missouri. They also cite copyright protection as reasons to not give course syllabus via email, but people are allowed to inspect the materials on campus, and that's what I did several months ago. And within the 9 to 5 workday, they did allow me an unlimited time to view the materials, which is why I was taken back by ASU's response. So I'm only given an hour to view everything. And then as I left the building, I noticed an employee that was stationed outside of the building. And I decided to ask about the fire drill because I was quite skeptical of it, but you never know. So I asked the employee if he was aware of any fire drill. And I should note that this employee had been stationed there all day, and he was not aware of it. So
interesting.
So that was my experience in trying to get this information.
Okay, so Neetu, talk to me about what you were able to see. What's the reasoning behind having this in a school of journalism? It sounds to me like this is about making sure that only people with correct attitudes and opinions are able to advance in these fields. I mean, am I overstating it by saying it that way?
Not at all. I'd say it's about conditioning students to think a certain way, to approach stories from a very specific angle, the desired progressive perspective. And I actually don't think that's a good idea for journalism. Journalism should be about pursuing the truth. It should be about presenting the public objective information and context. And what I see a DEI course at journalism school specifically doing is that it is handicapping journalists ideologically before their careers even begin.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and I also think it can serve as a filter. So if you're a more conservative-minded student, maybe you disagree with DEI, you might be filtered out because the course is just not going to allow your opinions. And I think this is a much larger problem than just being at the university, because it pretty much matches with the credibility problems we see in the media. Specifically, journalists who exclude certain contextual information that could be very important to a story, or focusing on a fringe case, which of course it might be true and it might be interesting, but it is not representative of the whole, and so it can mislead the public about their perceptions on certain issues.
Wow. I am so glad that you are shining some light on this, because this is a much bigger concern, and I'm just saying that as a consumer of media. This is a huge concern. If we can't, I mean, we're already having trust issues with some of the media. This would add to it. Neetu, where can people follow your work? Where can they find you?
Yes, so I'm on Twitter at Neetu, Neetu_Arnold, and I'm actually now on Instagram. You can also follow me there. I post a lot of explainer kind of videos, something that I may not be able to post on Twitter. So you can follow me on both those platforms.
Thank you so much. Great to visit with you again.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Corey Walker back to the program. Corey is a Young Voices Innovation Fellow as well as a graduate of the University of Michigan. Corey, good to catch up with you.
Hi, thank you for having me. So,
ChatGPT. I had not really heard a lot about this before just a few months ago, but now I hear about it everywhere. For people who are hearing ChatGPT for the first time, or who are, I've heard it too, but I have no idea what it is, how would you explain this to someone trying to get their mind around it?
Well, I kind of feel like most people, most people probably know by now, if you've been paying attention to the world we live in, artificial intelligence is playing a much more increasing role in American life. So I think that essentially ChatGPT works as an artificial intelligence, and kind of like the dumbest way I can explain it is it's you give it instructions, and it has a very sophisticated way, at least to us normal folk, of kind of like executing those instructions. So you can tell it to write an essay about The Great Gatsby, and it will be able to write you a 5-paragraph essay on The Great Gatsby, for example. You can ask it something as sophisticated as, write a monologue in the tone and style of, for example, Tucker Carlson. And it could do that for you as well. It could translate that for you in text. And we've also seen other companies, whether it's Microsoft or now Elon Musk, try to get in on their own artificial intelligence generation schemes. I would say that ChatGPT is playing a much more increasing role in American life. We've seen universities and schools have to react to students now using it to do things like write essays and do assignments for them. I think it was even sophisticated enough to where I was able to pass a Wharton business school exam and get a B. Now, I'm not really sure what that says about ChatGPT. I think perhaps it just means our education system is a little softer than what we thought it was. But it's a very fascinating technology.
Now, of course, anytime there's an advance like this, there's always concerns that, well, could this be used for evil purposes? And one of the first things I heard was actually a college professor saying, is this going to make it easier, for instance, for students to cheat, have ChatGPT write my essay on a given subject and essentially do the work for them? I mean, is that a concern that you've heard expressed?
Yeah, it was definitely a concern earlier. And I think maybe a lot of people were so reactionary, right? This isn't the first time there have been new technologies introduced in the classroom, right? Like there's a moral panic over calculators when that became a thing. And then eventually we just said, okay, we're going to give everyone a calculator. It's going to be an expectation you're going to learn how to use it. Same thing with certain things like Spark Notes and people using, reading text not through the primary source, but, using things like Spark Notes or other materials to get the abbreviated version. So ChatGPT is just kind of like the next iteration of that. There's been some panics, but the reality is that, there have been many people who've written their essays with ChatGPT and gotten pretty poor grades because ChatGPT doesn't necessarily give you accuracy, right? It can give you a very compelling, beautiful sounding piece of work, a piece of prose. However, it may not be factually true. So the thing is, if you're just a lazy student and just want to use ChatGPT to do your work for you, it's a good chance you may fail.
Wow. Well, you point out in your article that, the one thing it can't substitute for is an actual thinking human being. It can do a pretty good job of regurgitating information, in a plausible form, but it can't take the place of a human, which to me assuages some of the concerns people have that this thing's going to get self-aware and, go Skynet on us.
Well, I actually wrote another piece about this where we discussed this in further length, but the reality is artificial intelligence just isn't in a position to where it is sophisticated enough to take the job of a thinking human being yet. There's actually some really good TikToks of people showing going to drive-thrus for restaurants and trying to do automation. Very simple restaurant, can I get very simple orders. Can I get a large order of fries, and then it gives you a milkshake instead? And people frustratingly sitting in line for 15 minutes trying to get the order correct, and then they give up and just drive away. And I think that shows you that all the technology is very sophisticated, it is very impressive. It just isn't at the place right now to where people have to worry about it taking our jobs. And on top of that, there's the extra added dimension of the fact that, even if artificial intelligence does get there, we're predicting that there could be more jobs, even created, that human beings can actually be able to take advantage of, when artificial intelligence does get to that place to where it's taking the mundane jobs. So, I think a lot of people are kind of worried, but I think that, perhaps it could be liberating, quite frankly, if a lot of these really mundane jobs, quite frankly, who wants to work at McDonald's? I'm sorry, let's just be honest here. I don't think anyone wakes up every day oh my God, I look forward to going to flipping burgers, not to disparage or to diminish their work, because I know they work very hard, but it's just not something that I think people would be crying if they had to give up. But there are other jobs out there that will be more intellectually intensive, and I think, quite frankly, more rewarding for people, and could honestly, be even more lucrative, given that these will be jobs in new industries that people would be breaking into that don't necessarily have seniors that have been doing it for much longer that you have to compete with. So I'm actually really excited for how artificial intelligence can impact the labor market. I don't think it will be as much of a doomsday as other people are projecting it to be.
Well, I appreciate your optimism too. And I've been through the whole cycle of, is artificial intelligence and robots, are they going to take our jobs, to understanding that any jobs they do take over, entry-level work, mundane, repetitive kind of work, frees us up to pursue other jobs. And we don't even know what some of those jobs may be. They'll be invented, I guess, as we go.
You're completely right. And so I think that you have to take a very open-minded approach to this. And you're never going to stop technology, right? I don't care what Tucker Carlson says. You're not stopping technology. You just can't do it. There have been attempts before. We know how this goes. The genie's out of the box. We just have to figure out a way to adapt to new reality. And, also embrace the beautiful things that new technologies can give to us. Because I do think that artificial intelligence can be used for really great things in society if we make the right decisions, make the right decisions about it. But unfortunately, I just don't have faith in our government to do that. But I do think that the technology itself, isn't necessarily evil. It's about what you do with it.
No, I agree. And I appreciate in your article, too, where you talk about how, look, this may be a very smooth-talking, smart-sounding machine, but really, you scratch the surface and you find out it has its flaws. It's not taking things over, not by a long shot.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Wired that tried to replace their writing staff, or a good chunk of their writing staff, with ChatGPT. So they're having ChatGPT write a lot of their articles, what they figured out was that, oh, it's just like making a lot of things up, and a lot of these things are wrong, and it's quite frankly just kind of embarrassing for us. And so they actually had to go back and admit that, yes, this stuff was, done with automated intelligence, and it was wrong, and they had to go back and correct it. So it shows that it just isn't at the place yet to where we can just, replace entire writing staffs, entire restaurant staffs, with these sort of like algorithms. But could that day get here? It's possible, but we're just not close to that yet.
Okay. Again, we are talking with Corey Walker. He is a Young Voices Innovation Fellow and graduate of the University of Michigan. Corey, for people who want to follow up and see more of your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, definitely. You can follow me on Instagram at Corey, at Corey.Walker. And yeah, I mean, that's basically where you'll find my musings.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope we talk again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Charlie Brandt to the program. Charlie, for those who are meeting you for the first time, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. My name is Charlie. I'm a second-year law student at the George Washington University Law School, and I'm predominantly interested in First Amendment law and separation of powers. So that's federalism, checks and balances, and the sort.
Well, I'm looking at an article you penned for the Orange County Register. Kids have First Amendment rights too. They shouldn't be banned from social media. And Charlie, I'm concerned because I have been seeing headlines here of late of various legislators at the federal as well as at the local levels talking about, we need to make sure that kids can't get on TikTok or, whatever social media. I'm sure there are good intentions at work here, but talk to me about the problem. What exactly are they trying to address when they talk about banning kids from social media?
So there seems to be two central aims of those interested in banning children from social media. You have mental health considerations on the one hand, this notion that social media is a sort of mental poison that is depriving kids of sense of self-worth. Now, there is evidence to suggest that excessive use of social media does increase incidence of depression, especially among youths. So let's set that aside for a moment. The other justification has to do with exploitation. And it's somewhat nebulous to what these legislators are referring, whether it's children are vulnerable to exploitation online or kids are being actively exploited by big businesses and social media companies online. It's somewhat unclear. But I'm sure if Congress were to enact any legislation on this front, though I doubt that is likely at this time, it would assemble a large finding of fact that would steer the court in evaluating the constitutionality of any ban from minors using social media.
Wow. I mean, on the one hand, and part of this is because I have young kids in their early teens, and I do think that social media has an impact. Now the bigger question becomes, but do I think it has enough impact that I want government to step in and be the arbiter of who should and who shouldn't be on social media? Because I don't think I want to go there.
I couldn't agree with you more. The basic flaw in this proposal is that the congressmen are acting as if children are not entitled to First Amendment liberties. We have known, at least since 1969, when the Supreme Court handed down the famous case, Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District, that children are entitled to at least a large measure of First Amendment protection. In that case, two children, I believe it was, were disciplined for wearing black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War. They did so in a peaceful manner. They did not disrupt the school in any way, shape, or form, and they were disciplined nonetheless. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. They're not disrupting the school day. They're merely expressing themselves. So we've known at least since then that children are entitled to First Amendment liberties. Well, according to Josh Hawley, that's no concern. That a ban on social media would be totally lawful. I mean, the senator really evinces no constitutional qualms with his proposal, despite the fact that I'm sure he knows better. He was former Attorney General of Missouri. So he's a learned legal mind and likely knows all too well the legal challenges likely to arise if his proposal were enacted into law.
So I'm curious, where do we arrive at the consensus of where a young person may exercise their rights more fully? It seems like age 18 is where we're like, okay, you're old enough to contract, to agree to sign your name and be held responsible for things that you weren't when you were younger. I agree with you that First Amendment rights probably kick in much earlier than that. Do we withhold full exercise of some of those rights until, such age as they would be considered, legally able to make those decisions for themselves? And I'm not asking for any particular number, but just wondering, what are your thoughts on how a society can make a reasonable arrival at what would be appropriate versus what wouldn't?
Absolutely. So there's political rights and there's natural rights. So voting, for instance, is a political right. And so age restrictions make more sense. But speech is, in my view, and the view of the founding fathers, a natural right. Mm-hmm. It's something we're born with and that no government ought to be able to take away. Following that line of reasoning, it would appear to me that children are entitled to First Amendment protection in pretty much the fullest sense. Now, let me be clear here. Obscenity, which includes child pornography, is not constitutionally protected. It never has been constitutionally protected. Going back to 1781 when the Bill of Rights was ratified, or 1791, I believe it was, obscenity was understood to not be protected speech. Fighting words are not protected speech. True threats are not protected speech. But beyond these categories, the Supreme Court has been extremely reluctant to recognize new exceptions to First Amendment liberties.
Okay. I appreciate your take on that. Talk to me about where should the primary responsibility reside when it comes to decisions about kids being on social media. My default, and maybe this is knee-jerk, is hey, parents should be the first in line to be making those kinds of decisions. Is it parents who should be telling Congress or perhaps even their state legislatures to, hey, please get back in your lane?
I think you're exactly right. Parents and guardians are where this power resides. Parents, of course, have the power to yank their kids off of social media and punish them if they use it. What I'm simply saying is that the federal government should not have this coercive power to force parents to make that decision. The decision should stay in the household. And if any government is to address an issue like this, family dynamics, child safety, it's generally to be had at the state and local levels, not the federal level. Indeed, our federal government is one of enumerated powers. So it's not entirely clear pursuant to what power Senator Hawley even imagines enacting the statute, though it's likely the Commerce Clause, because that's been blown up over the years to become kind of a naked police power pursuant to which the federal government can regulate basically whatever it wants with some minor limitations.
Very true.
But I would assert that your intuition is correct, that parents and guardians have the principal responsibility for the safety of their children, even when it comes to the internet.
I got to tell you, the longer I live, and maybe it's the more I become aware of the impact that social media has, the more leery I become of it. And I don't know if you've seen like The Social Dilemma or some of the shows that kind of show how it can become very addictive in some ways. We get the need for that dopamine fix. Who has liked what I've shared here or whatever? And I could see kids being particularly susceptible to it. Now, short of calling for government to get involved, are there things that social media companies could or should be doing that would encourage more responsible use?
Yeah, I think a lot of parents find parental controls unsuitable for use. Like, I don't think they understand them very well. So I think more effective parental controls might be the right way to encourage safety on the one hand, but the practice of fundamental liberties on the other. I can't really speak to parental controls. I'm no expert on it, but what I can say is that it seems that parents themselves don't know how to use them. Josh Hawley admitted as much on an interview with Hannity that, he wasn't too confident in his own or parents' ability to use parental controls because, as he put it, kids know technology better than their parents do. Well, that may be. But one thing the courts will ask if something like this is ever enacted is, are there more narrowly tailored means by which Congress could fulfill a similar objective, or the same objective, rather? And I think in this particular instance, you're right that there is, and parental controls are likely one of them. How that specifically would play out, I can't say, but I do think there is something in parental controls that offers us a solution.
Well, and now the next thing we've got to do is work on helping the general public understand that just because there's a concern doesn't mean that there needs to be a law. We've got to get in the habit of solving these problems at the lowest possible level, starting with, in the home, and then, going outward from there. But I appreciate you taking on what could be a very difficult and polarizing topic. I think you've hit on some very reasonable solutions, and above all, don't look to government first and foremost as the one to come in there and solve it for you, because however they solve it, it's going to create some unintended consequences that will come along with it. Again, we're talking with Charlie Brandt. Charlie, where can people follow you on social media? Where can they find more of your work?
You can find me at Charlie Brandt 44 on Twitter, and you can also find me on my Young Voices webpage.
Okay, and we will actually have a link in the show notes that will take them to this article that we were citing from the OC Register. Really appreciate you visiting with me. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for having me. You and your listeners have a wonderful day as well.